You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet.
Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. Well, what a year it has been. If you'd told me at the beginning of 2019 about the year that I would have been surprised, enthused, amazed, and well, a little humbled. With Speaking Sidemount, we started the year with episode 18, where I spoke with Natalie Gibb about her cave diving and exploration in Mexico. And here we are now at episode 43, having just blown through 50,000 downloads with over 1,200 divers listening to each and every episode. It's hardly Joe Rogan, but for the highly specialized niche of diving that sidemount and cave diving represent, I think it's absolutely awesome. And yet there were some frustrations too. There is no doubt that I'm not getting in as many dives as I would like, which is for sure hugely frustrating and one of my work-ons for 2020. But having said that, I still logged 103 dives, and I think the clear picture of 2019 was quality over quantity. I knocked out a few dives in my favourite locations here in New Zealand on the Canterbury Wreck, my second home, and the Poor Knights Islands, and taught sidemount to some excellent students. Thanks to all of them for allowing me to teach them the fundamentals of sidemount diving, and I hope that I set them on a path to becoming better divers. I also spent a brilliant 2 weeks in June cave diving in Mount Gambier, South Australia. I did the Advanced Cave Crossover and became a member of the Cave Diving Association of Australia. We dived Tank Cave, The Pines, Kilsby Sinkhole, and Engelbrett Cave, just to name a few. I struggled through a single ropes technique course and managed to haul myself 15 metres or so vertically out of Baker's Cave. It was awesome. But so were the people that I met, dived with, and hung out with. My dive buddies Corey Kerr and Guy Bate, our CDAA examiner John Della Zuana or JDZ, the crew from Reef to Ridge, Rob Main, Sam Bennett and Lockie Trott, Ryan and Victoria Kachkowski, who set up the Habby dive accommodation, just an awesome place to stay when you're diving in that area, and of course my guest in episode 42, Chris Dawson. Now in September I completed Cave DPV KISS Sidewinder CCR training with Edd Sorenson at Cave Adventurers in Mariana, Florida, and then enjoyed some amazing dives in Jackson Blue and Hole in the Wall. I unpacked this whole experience in episode 40, so head back there if you want to know more. Now after Florida, I had a family catch-up and holiday time in Barcelona, and then headed to Sardinia to dive with Thorsten Toddy Velder and his team in the caves of Sardinia. Toddy and I knocked out a brilliant interview, not only on diving the caves of Sardinia, but also on his stunning exploration projects there, which include absolutely cutting-edge decompression strategies. Look out for that episode coming up in January of next year. Now along the way I interviewed Richard Harry Harris twice, including the stunning episode 41 on the Thai Cave Rescue, and just a myriad of amazing divers, instructors and explorers from all over the world. A quick count shows my guests are being located in Mexico, Niue Island, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Sweden, Sri Lanka, the Bahamas, Italy, Gozo, Malta, Bali in Indonesia, and Greece. And I want to take this opportunity at the end of this amazing year to thank all of my guests for selflessly giving up their time to share their knowledge, to inspire us, and to help improve our diving and safety. I also want to thank my podcast sponsor XDEEP. Manufacturing dive equipment is a tough gig, and manufacturing great equipment is even tougher. It's no small thing that when I spoke to Pieter at XDEEP over a year ago about Speaking Sidemount and the audience that I was building, that he was immediately supportive of the concept. Their support means that I've been able to buy equipment and software and take time away from my other activities to produce each episode. It's huge, and I'm very grateful to XDEEP for their support. Shearwater Research have also supported me along the way. Having met Bruce and Lynn Partridge personally in Truck Lagoon last year and having been a long-time fan of their products and support, it was awesome to do some work with them on two amazing products, the Terek and the Nerd 2 dive computers, which have become integral to my dive planning and execution, and I think play a big role in dive safety. But above all, I want to thank all of you for listening, for sharing, for commenting, and the many, many positive messages that you've sent to me. It means a lot, and I have some big plans for expanding the podcast in 2020, so listen out for those and look out for some announcements in the new year. So on with this episode. As I conduct our interviews, I get the opportunity to share my personal thoughts on the many subjects that we cover on Speaking Sidemount. It's fun to share, and I think it supports the concept that divers love to dive, but second to that, they love to talk about diving. I've been asked a couple of times to turn the tables, if you like, and become the guest on the show. It was never my intention for me to be the focus, but when Audrey Cudel hit me up with the idea, it was hard to refuse. If you know Audrey, you know what I mean. So in this week's episode, Audrey interviews me. We talk about my vision when I started Speaking Sidemount, how I develop episodes and how I find interview guests, and on top of that, how my own knowledge has grown through conducting these interviews with great divers from around the world. We talk about diving here in New Zealand and the Sidemount training courses that I run. We cover my experience training on the KISS Sidewinder with Edd Sorenson and my plans for the future diving of this unit. We cover diving the XDEEP Stealth 2.0 with the Sidewinder, and also we spend a heap of time talking about my thoughts on the current state of Sidemount diving and instruction. All this and much, much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount.
So tell me when to go.
Go.
Good morning, Steve.
Good evening, Audrey.
Yeah, quite time difference. Yeah.
Indeed.
First of all, very happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a wonderful birthday. I had literally hundreds of messages on Facebook, which is always awesome. But my daughter lives about 4 hours away from us. So she came for a few days beforehand, and we had a nice family dinner on Friday night the day before. And then she and I went out for a beautiful lunch at a winery and did some wine tasting. So it was excellent. Had a great day. Thank you.
So it's a new life starting again among all the different activities and businesses you're running at the same time.
Yeah, well, it's just another year for us. You know, every year we have plans. Much of those plans is around business, and then some of it's around diving. And already I have trips planned for the coming year, which is great. I'd like to squeeze a couple more in there because it's one of the things I love to do. So it's another year. Feels good. I'm okay with everything.
We've been in touch the past months, the past years together for a while, and thought it would be nice, because I'm a photographer, I like to be behind the camera, so I thought it would be nice maybe to turn the podcast the other way around and put you in front of the mic instead of interviewing the people. So thanks for inviting me back, but this time you're the one getting wet.
And to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous because the person who asked the question has all the control, right?
It's good you get to know how it feels.
Exactly, a little bit of empathy now.
I think you've been now recording about 40 podcasts. Indeed,
yeah. So I'm editing episode 41 right now.
So you're the one on the list now and feels a bit different, right?
Exactly. All right, Audrey, I'm at your mercy.
So as to start, what inspired you to create the Speaking Sidemount concept, and what was your vision of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I spoke about that a couple of times way back in episode 1, I think, but the biggest thing for me, I was in Truck Lagoon and hanging out with a bunch of great divers. And it kind of took me back to the times that I was working with you and Gozo, where I was just diving day in, day out and loving it. And one of the things in my life right now is that I don't get to dive as often as I really like to. And so, you know, some of the people I'm interviewing, such as yourself, you're in the water sort of 300 days a year plus. And for me right now, at this point in my life, I don't get to do that. So I had this massive itch around diving where I wasn't really being fulfilled enough by it and I needed something else. That was one part. I was looking for what could I do to expand my contact with diving. And then the other part was, for a long time, I'd been really dissatisfied with what I was reading and seeing on Facebook forums and other diving forums. And it seemed to me that the best divers in the world, the people that I looked up to, that were either my peers or the people that I sought training from, really weren't participating. There were a few who were, but most weren't. And I kind of thought that was a shame because we weren't getting to hear your voice. We weren't getting to hear Tom's voice. We weren't getting to hear Steve Bogart's very much. Steve was a little bit more active. Steve Martin never participates or very rarely participates. And so some of the really great divers around, and I've missed out many because there are lots, but I never got to hear their point of view. And I felt as if there was a lot of what I would consider keyboard divers who talk a good game, but don't necessarily have what it takes in the water. And that's probably being a little unfair. And also a lot of those conversations ends up in what I call shit fights, where, there's just one person expresses a point of view and they get shot down. And then there's another point of view, they get shot down. And it just turns into these sometimes quite nasty arguments around things that are relatively trivial, like how long should my bungees be, for instance. And I found that quite frustrating. So I thought, look, there's got to be a way to get the voices of the really good divers out there. And so it was kind of this dual idea of getting those voices heard, but also making sure that I kind of scratched an itch for myself. And there was quite a selfish side there too, because what a great opportunity for me to get to talk personally with all of these great divers. And I've learned over the 12, 15 months that we've been running now so much from each of those conversations. I always take away a little bit myself. And then, of course, what I get to do with Speaking Sidemount is share that with the rest of the Sidemount diving community. And in the beginning, my expectations were kind of relatively low. I thought a few people might listen. I thought there'd be an audience, but I didn't think it would turn into what it is now. And I also thought that people would try and shoot me down. So maybe I was being a little negative in my own mind, but I expected a fair amount of pushback. And to be honest, I've got nearly none. I've had a little bit of criticism around sound quality, which I think is fair. But in the main, in fact, 99% of people have been incredibly positive. I've had amazing feedback. I'm just super humbled by that. And so I've loved it and I'm loving doing it. And we're now looking at a point in time where each episode gets well over 1,000 unique listeners. So while that's a small audience compared to someone like Joe Rogan, for instance, podcasting, it's a really good... Yeah, exactly. But it's a really good audience for side mount diving. We're just this little niche of diving. And to have 1,000 people all around the world listening to these podcasts and hopefully learning from them or even just enjoying them, I think is brilliant. And so I'm over the moon with where it is and I want to take it further. We've just started, I think, and there's a lot more that we can do with it. And I'm excited about that.
It's been quite a while since we last spoke. One of the first 6 or 10 episodes, I can't remember.
Yes.
How's the series been going for you since then? And how do you come up with a list of participants and topics you want to go through?
Yeah, that's a hard one because quite often I'm the victim of my own circle. So I know the people I know and there's many, many great divers out there that I don't know. So I'm a little bit reliant on my audience to make suggestions. And I did ask a while ago for a bunch of suggestions. So many of those came up and that was great. Sometimes I find my guests from my own travels. So I went to Mount Gambier in Australia and managed to meet with Ryan Kitchkowski, one of the great cave explorers in Australia. I met John Delazuana, or JDZ as he's known, and I haven't interviewed him yet. I need to put him on the list, but just met these great divers in Australia that while I'd known of some of them, I didn't know very many of them. And being now part of the Cave Diving Association of Australia, there's this great membership there that are worth listening to as well. They've got some just brilliant cave divers there who dive a little differently to what you see in Mexico as well. So it's quite interesting to me to see the different techniques and different ways of side mount diving. I thought I was pretty open-minded, but I had been a little bit closed-minded by the way that we do things, Audrey. It's kind of like, this is the right way, if you like. And I'm learning, especially hanging out with someone like Toddy as well recently, that there are a lot of different ways to side mount dive. And many of them work, and some of them have great little ideas in them. For instance, I put a Toddy clip on my long hose recently just to try that out, and I love it. Oh, my God. Yeah, I know, and I love it. So it's quite interesting how, especially on the Sidewinder.
Toddy was nice enough to give me a try on his unit and explain its concept. And I think that's something my KISS Sidewinder instructor, Jacek Konikowski, explained to me when he came in August and we were challenging what are the best side mount options. And he was explaining to me why he had this lollipop SPG that I tend to dislike.
Yes.
And he came up with really good points about diving cold water. You can't move, you can't have access to this and that. And did it ever put him in trouble in situations like exploration in caves or whatever? And never. So yeah, it's true. You have to keep being open-minded, and that's the added value of the podcast you're running, because you're touching a variety of people with different backgrounds, different activities. So
yeah, look, I had the same thing with Edd, because Edd has his first stages the other way around to the way we do. So he has them away from his body. And Edd is a really dialed-in diver. You know, he's just like you, just like people that we dive with. His trim is extraordinary. He's always stable in the water, and yet he dives with his cylinders the other way around. And he would always say to me, everyone else, their cylinders are always too low. And that was interesting to me, and I was able to get mine dialed in nicely. But we had a few interesting discussions in the beginning, and in the end we got there with mine the other way around to his. But I think we have to give everyone the space to dive the way they want to dive. So long as you understand, Edd has a saying, and this is a good saying, what is the why behind the how? So it's one thing to say, here's how you do it, but why do you do it that way? And if you have a good why, then I think no problem. So if you need to lollipop them, and here's why I do that. If you need to use a tidy clip, and here's why I think that's better, then no problem. I love all of that. And I'm open enough now. As I said, I'm trying a tidy clip out now on my long hose rather than having a breakaway, because I want to see how that works. And certainly on the Sidewinder, where it needs to be quite close into your body up there, and I've been using the razor clip, and it does hang a bit on the razor clip. It hangs a little lower. So that's not necessarily good if you're going through tight spaces. So I think, there's lots of good ideas. If you like an idea you see, I think you should try it. And if it works for you, take it. If it doesn't, then carry on the way you've been going, if you like.
You're not diving and teaching in New Zealand?
Yeah, I am.
How are the training dive sites compared to where we met in Gozo or other location where you've been experiencing some Sidemount teaching? What kind of adaptation have you had to make to techniques or equipment?
Yeah, interesting. New Zealand's a really interesting place for diving. There's a few aspects to that. I mean, number one, the water's relatively temperate here. So it's not super cold. In the winter, it goes down to about 14 Celsius. In the summer, it comes up to about 22. So it's a little cooler. So for me now, it's dry suit all year round. I used to dive wetsuit in the summer and dry suit in the winter, but I'm dry suit all year round now. But the big challenge in New Zealand is the conditions are such that there are shore diving sites, but there's not a lot of shore diving sites. And the visibility on shore can range from, less than a meter to, on a bad day, to sometimes you get 12 or 15 meters, and on occasions you'll get better. So quite often shore diving sites are quite limited visibility wise. Sometimes the access can be difficult. So for instance, if there's a beach or a rocky area, getting your vehicle near to that can be challenging. And then, of course, weather conditions as well. So the weather here can be quite changeable. So you can find that you're dealing with waves and bad conditions, which can rule out a particular site. So shore diving is a little bit challenging. Having said that, there are some really good sites. And so that's what I tend to do when I'm doing courses, is I'll find a shore diving site. And I certainly want to, for the first couple of dives on the course, dive from shore, because the typical way of diving here is boat diving. So you'll go out with a operator, similar to what we do in Gozo and on occasion, and then the boat operator will take you to dive sites. And the dive sites that I dive a lot here are the Poor Knights Islands, which are world famous. It's a marine reserve that's been that way for 25 plus years now. The marine life is just unbelievable. There are fish everywhere. In fact, there's a couple of sites there that you dive. One's Blue Mau Mau Arch. You dive through that and you cannot see the arch because it's full of blue mau mau. It's like being in fish soup. So it's a really, really neat place to dive. There's lots of big, what you call reef fish, but they're big kingfish who grow up to 1.5 meters, 2 meters long. There's snapper. There's just every manner of New Zealand reef fish. But because it's in the East Australian current, we also get some tropical species on occasion. So occasionally we'll see a manta ray. There's even whale sharks come down from time to time. They're not prolific, but they do come. And then in the winter, we get marine mammals. There's seals, there's orca, there's dolphin. It's just it's an incredible place. And the other place I go a lot is the Canterbury Wreck, which I have a very close association with because I served on that
which
ship.
You wrote about in your book.
I did, yeah. I wrote a book on it. And that book came about. I served on the ship 3 times, starting as an 18-year-old. And in the end, I was the chief engineer of that ship. So I know it very, very well and have a very strong connection to it. It was awesome for me to dive it once it was sunk as a dive wreck. A lot of old sailors cried when that happened, but I thought it was the best thing that could happen to it. She lives on and continues to serve the country as far as I'm concerned. So I loved it. But what I found was the knowledge of the ship was relatively poor. The operator who dives it a lot knows it very well, but they didn't know what each of the compartments was used for and how the ship worked. So I was able to contribute that and love it. And it's a super cool training site for any type of wreck diving, great for side mount diving as well. So I dive there a lot. So Gozo, to make a comparison, it's so easy. You jump in the truck, drive to shore, you unload your gear, you fall in the water, and there you are, 6-meter plateau that goes down to 40. How easy is that? If it's windy that day, you go to the other side of the island, so it's way, way different to that.
You get to walk a little bit with your cylinders from time to time, climb some ladders.
You do. Yeah, indeed. The wreck site is probably an example, or a little bit at the inland sea, but honestly, that is so easy compared to what we do here. Very lucky. For sure.
Are the cylinders options you have around different from other locations you've been traveling to?
Yeah, because New Zealand is colder water and mainly salt water, we tend to dive steels. So 12-litre steels are very, very commonly available here, and that tends to be a weapon of choice. There isn't any real reason why you couldn't dive aluminium or aluminum 11-litre 80 cubic foot cylinders either, except that you'll be carrying quite a bit of weight with a dry suit and salt water. So I've dived both here. I prefer steels in New Zealand, and both of those cylinders are very, very commonly available.
You would consider the diving community there to be mainly local, or it's many tourists visiting? And
yeah, there's a mixture. I mean, we don't get a lot of tourist diving. We do get some, and most of them would go to places like the Poor Knights Islands, and there's 2 very good operators there that operate directly to the islands, one of which is, I think, the biggest dive operator in New Zealand, Dive Tutukaka. And they have a very, very professional tourist operation. And then the other one that we tend to go with a lot is Yukon Dive, and they are very good with technical divers. So they take out a lot of the people who want to go a little deeper, a little longer, rebreather divers and so on. So there's 2 very good operators there, but most of what I see is local, which means it's quite small. We're a small country, so there's a very passionate, quite talented, to be honest, small diving community here. And then there's tourists that you mainly see in Tutukaka and those sort of places, occasionally in the Bay of Islands, who'll come out, and some of them have learned to dive in Thailand and those sort of places too. So it's a little bit of a surprise. It's colder water here, but once you get past that, it's terrific diving. So highly recommended if anyone's coming here.
How are you splitting your time between teaching, diving, Speaking Sidemount, and your new business, the Beach Box now?
Yeah, so it's interesting. As you and I talked off mic, I really don't get to dive enough at the moment. It's quite frustrating for me. When I came back to New Zealand, my wife and I went to the far north of the country, which is a beautiful part. It's very beach-oriented here. We live in a place called Cooper's Beach, and we have some land there. So we decided to develop a coffee shop business because there wasn't one there. And I've always been kind of a business guy. I ran software companies before I got more into diving. So I just thought, look, this is crazy. There's no coffee in this area. And so I thought, we'll fix that. So we put a container-based coffee and gelato store in there, and it's been very successful. But it takes time.
You're more on the coffee part or gelato part yourself?
Probably more coffee, to be honest. But every now and again, I find myself gravitating down to that end of the shipping container, and it's pretty nice. So you know what it's like after a dive, right?
Right. We're always starving.
Exactly. So the coffee shop takes most of my time. And then outside of that, I try and get away at least twice a month for my own diving. And then I try and run a course every month as well, whether that's what I call my Sidemount Fundamentals course, which is the entry level, beginning with 2 cylinders type course, or the Tech Sidemount course, which is more multi-cylinder Sidemount decompression diving, or heading towards diving and overheads. I try and do at least one of those a month. And a lot of that's just driven by demand. If somebody contacts me and says, hey, I want to do a course, then I do a course. If nobody contacts me, then I don't do a course and I go diving for myself. So it's very driven by demand and Steve a little bit. And as I said, I'd love to dive more. I kind of would love to dive every week. I've got this plan in my mind about how I might meld my life into something more like diving every week. I don't necessarily need to dive every day, but I think every week isn't unreasonable, is it?
I don't know. I dive every day.
It's a point of frustration for me on Facebook. They say Facebook is not good for your mental health sometimes. And I know for me, when I'm watching people like you and others who are in the water every day in beautiful places, it is a little frustrating sometimes. But I get around it with trips where I go away on either trips locally or overseas, and it makes up for it somewhat.
You just came back from a nice trip. Part of it was dedicated to something you've mentioned in the past podcast, Sidemount CCR. You've been training with Edd Sorenson. How was the whole experience?
Wow. Well, the last episode, so right now we're sitting here between episode 40 and 41, and episode 40 is all about that experience. And
if I sort of unpack that a little more, when I was in truck last year, that trip with Pete Measley, there's a lot of rebreather divers who go on that trip. And I had always been a little bit influenced by Tom, who was sort of anti-rebreathers for some time. And also a little bit by just the whole economics of it all, and also by the fact that I could dive to 65 meters quite comfortably in Sidemount with 4 cylinders. But I was starting to think the amount of decompression time that was required on just a small bottom time at 65 meters, and just being able to manage your partial pressure of oxygen so that you're optimal and you optimize your decompression time, I thought was going to be valuable. But then the other side was just the cost of helium in this part of the world is really, really high. I think when I was in Gozo, it was kind of 4 cents a litre. I'm not sure if it's the same now, but we're 15 to 25 cents a litre here in New Zealand, which in euros probably 15, 16 euro cents, I think. And in truck, it's 15 cents US. It starts to get really expensive if you want to do a bunch of, really good trimix dives. And what it starts to push you towards is back to air diving, which I don't think is a good idea. So I really didn't want to be doing that. So I did a 55-meter air dive in San Francisco Maru, which went well, but you never know what's going to happen. If you have a problem at 55 meters and you're diving air, you think you're going to be able to do a good job at responding to it, but are you really? And you don't know, right? And so I thought I don't really want to be doing that. But what was holding me back was this feeling of not wanting to go to a back mount rebreather, not wanting to go back to absolute square one, throwing away everything that I developed as a side mount diver. And through working with you and people like you, my trim is pretty good. My ability to manage my equipment in the water is good. So I didn't want to lose that. The research was, as I said, you Speaking Sidemount. For that, I spoke to Steve Bogarts, Jill Heineth, Gary Dallas, Michael Thomas, Christina Zanato, Ed. I just spoke to everyone I could. Anyone who was anywhere near a rebreather.
Investigation.
Indeed. And so, some people go for tri dives, but I thought, no, I'm just going to talk to people and see what they think. It was interesting because many of the people diving side mount rebreathers, because they're quite new, they didn't have a lot of experience either. And probably out of all of them, Ed has the most experience on the greatest number of rebreathers, although admittedly not back mount. He's really is a true and true side mount diver as well. I thought, okay, look, Michael Thomas said this is good. Christina Zanato said it's good. Ed says it's good. I like what they're saying about you get in the water and you're almost instantly back in trim. I like the idea of using my existing equipment. I like the idea of having more bailout, the ability to have your offboard dill and your bailout cylinder in the same side mount configuration that we did before, which effectively means you've got a bit more bailout. So I thought all of this is good. And look, cost comes into it as well. When you compare the cost of a Sidewinder to the cost of an ECCR, it's several thousand euro, dollars, whatever you want to say, less expensive because it's simple. It's a relatively simple piece of kit. And I thought, well, I'm not necessarily a simple guy, but I think there is the whole KISS principle. There's some value there. So I thought, let's make this the first one and let's get proficient on this unit. And if I later on want to go and try an electronic one, then again, the Liberty sounds really, really good. The T-Reb sounds really, really good. I'd be happy to go and investigate those. For the same perspective, the KISS Sidekick sounds quite good as well. So if I felt the need to go to either a side-mounted unit like the Sidekick, or I wanted to go to an electronic unit like the Liberty or the T-Reb, then those opportunities were always available to me later. So, that's how that all came about. The trip itself was just so much fun. I flew to California. I used to live there, so I caught up with friends on the way in. Florida's interesting. You're in the deep south there for sure. You fly into either Tallahassee or Panama City to get to Mariana. But from there, you drive inland, and so you're in the south for sure. It's a very interesting place, very different from what I'm used to. But the people are nice, and the diving is spectacular. The caves, I have to say, I was super impressed with Jackson Blue, and it's a beautiful cave. Not a big formations type cave, but just a really interesting cave in terms of passages and what you see. The water's crystal clear. It's a flow cave. That's quite interesting, having spent a bit of time in Australia and also in Mexico. It's quite different from that in terms of working with flow, but that's fun too. It's a lot of fun coming out of the flow, put it that way. And then the other cave, Hole in the Wall, which was my favorite, is just magnificent. It's got these cathedral-sized passages and then tight, very salty spaces as well, which was a lot of fun to play in. So I had a great experience. Ed's a consummate teacher. Every great teacher you train with, you learn some new things. I learned a lot of great things from Ed in terms of the course, but also from an instructor point of view. So that was great. He's a cool guy. He's done a lot.
He's a very cool guy. I got a chance to bump into him as I was diving in Mariana, Hole in the Wall as well back in March. And stepped by as we were about to leave. And he was nice enough to spend like an hour dismantling the Sidewinder in front of me and explaining the pros and cons. And he was just returning from Dominican Republic.
Yes.
I really appreciated his time, his honesty. It was really nice getting to talk to him when I didn't know much about him, actually.
Yeah, because if you dive in Europe or Mexico or New Zealand, Australia, I mean, a lot of the Florida community, we don't know them. And if we do know them, we know the High Springs people. Ed's in Jackson County there. And so it's a different space, but great guy. He's done some things that are just extraordinary. But at the same time, he's accessible. He's a little bit tough to reach by email, I'll say that. But he's very, very good once you connect with him. And if you're talking about Sidewinder in particular, then he's the man. Mike Young uses him as his test diver, and he's done more dives on the Sidewinder than anyone else. And so if you want to know about that unit, then he's the guy. And of course, he's passed that knowledge on. Sorry, I missed the name of your instructor.
Jacek.
Jacek,
he was the one referenced to me actually by Edd when I talked to Edd and I asked him what instructor he would recommend in Europe.
Yes.
Considering the unit is not CE approved, there's not a lot of instructors right now in Europe. And he directed me to Jacek, was nice enough to come in Gozo and train me there.
Yes.
Very knowledgeable, very patient guy. So looking forward to meeting him in Poland where he has his dive center and keep on practicing more with him.
So the knowledge is being transferred, and so there are other great divers who are now picking up the Sidewinder. And, you're going to be amongst those at some point, and hopefully I will be too, but we've got to build some hours, right? So
you got to practice on the Sidewinder, maybe in the cave, mainly in the cave environment. You were training. Do you have any other specific targets for CCR diving in general, like deep diving or?
Yeah, it was so good in the cave, and that was the interesting thing for me. And caves is Ed's thing. Ed doesn't dive open water, so it's caves or nothing with him. And so that was just excellent to do some guided diving with him afterwards and, really push the unit. And I don't think I could have done that with anybody else just because of who he is and where we were. So that was fun. But the goal has always been to use the Sidewinder the same way as I use open circuit, but to enable it to extend my open circuit diving. So I'm really excited. I haven't had a chance to do it yet because of the cylinder issue in New Zealand, which hopefully it'll be solved in the next few weeks. Can't wait to take it to the Canterbury, for instance, and do a dive in there. And again, I'm building hours, so I'm going to be pretty conservative for a while, but I've had a space on there, the boiler room, which I know very well. I spent much of my life in there, either working in there when it was a ship, and I've spent a lot of time diving in there now as well, but it's become a very silty space, and there's a lot of piping and ducting in there that silt is settled on, which means that in open circuit, there's massive amounts of percolation when you go in there. So I've been trying to do this little video project where I light the space up and take some video in there, and it hasn't been possible in open circuit, even though I've been very careful. I've never been able to really achieve more than a few minutes in there without it becoming a mess. So I can't wait to go in there with the Sidewinder and really go in there carefully and set up some lights and see if I can get some good video imagery of there. So that's one thing I want to do. And there's tons of other spaces in there that are similar. The engine room isn't as silty, but it was also quite tight at the bottom. So I'm looking forward to sort of playing a bit in there in it. And then the next thing is taking the Sidewinder a little deeper. At the moment, I'm kind of stuck at normoxic trimix because of the cost of helium in New Zealand. There's just no value in my mind of doing an open circuit hypoxic trimix course here. So I would like to extend it a bit further. I don't know that whether I'll go to that advanced trimix level on CCR or not, but it does give me the opportunity to explore that. So, and certainly I want to get to normoxic trimix reasonably quickly because I've got some dives I want to do that are a little deeper. I'm in Truck Lagoon next June, so I'm not sure how far I'll get to progress and whether that's going to be possible, but Truck has a lot of fantastic wrecks in the 45 meter range, so they're accessible to me now. And so I can't wait to spend a bit more time on those with the Sidewinder. And then if I can get to normoxic trimix, then there's a wreck called the OET, which is a destroyer that's at 65 to 70 meters. So I'd really love to get some dives done on that, and that'll just be a matter of whether I can progress far enough in that time. And as I've said many times, I'm not in any rush. Many CCR divers have come unstuck, pushing hours too fast and not building the appropriate amount of experience. So I'm not that guy. So I'll make sure that I've done what I need to do. And if I can make it in time, great. If I can't, then I'll dive at open circuit, or I'll just do some other dives. So yeah, so that's really it. It's really a little bit deeper and longer open water, taking it into wrecks for sure. And then I definitely want to go back to Mount Gambier in Australia and dive the caves there. Tank Cave is just a great cave for the Sidewinder, I think. There's a lot of guys diving the Sidekick there at the moment. I think I'd be the only Sidewinder guy who would be going there. So I can't wait to give that a go in Tank, because I think the cave's just made for it. There are some little small spaces, and there's decent 1 kilometre plus penetrations that you can do that really mean that having the extra time and less gas stress, time stress, distance stress, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
You're diving on the XDEEP Stealth tech.
Yes.
You haven't changed since we've met.
No.
How did you find adapting the unit to the Stealth tech? What did the setup involve, really? I'm diving the Razor myself, and it was a discovery with Jacek, who had never configured the unit on another side mount system. And I found out it worked pretty well. So it's definitely flexible, and you can be adapted to any kind of system. How did you find it for the XDEEP Stealth?
And this was a big consideration for me previously, because I'd heard that with the Sidewinder prior to my course that it was very difficult to reach behind you. So the can stops your arm going back. And as we all know, the dump on the XDEEP Stealth is right in the middle bottom. And some people struggle to reach that anyhow, if you've got short arms or big arms or a big body.
I'm struggling myself for now to reach my butt D-ring, so I'm going to have to find a way around that. Yeah,
exactly. So getting to butt D-rings and a butt dump is really difficult. So I reached out to XDEEP and got them to send a new unit to Edd in advance. And Edd has some modifications that he does to the Stealth tech that he dives himself that enable you to dump from a shoulder dump, which is pretty cool. So what he's done is he's moved the dump to the left side, which is basically where the inflator goes. He's installed a shoulder dump there, which took a little bit of engineering as well. It's not just a piece of cord stuck onto a dump that's been installed there, which is something in itself. It's got a little ball on it that helps make it very easy. So it's a very soft pull on that dump to get it to operate, which is excellent. And then the inflator, because that inflator port is now being used by the dump, he's moved the inflator down to the bottom where the previous dump was, and that inflator now is longer and runs up under your arm as it does now and connects to your chest. So not too dissimilar to what I'm used to. So they're pretty cool mods. Not everybody can do those mods, which is something you have to think about. Edd certainly does them as a service if you want something done and you can get to America or get your unit there. But it is something to consider. I haven't been through the process of figuring out if I didn't do that mod, how would you dive the Stealth tech? I'm assuming that Patrick Woodman and Philip Lehman have done that. So that's something that I'm not familiar with and would be interesting to find out what they did do. And I know Patrick's actually done some further mods where he's got the counterlung installed inside the Stealth tech, which I think is pretty cool. Be interested to know how that works and whether that's something.
There's a new podcast coming then.
Indeed, yeah. And I think I'm pretty sure Patrick's spoken to Peter at XDEEP about that as well, about whether this is some sort of customization that can come directly from the manufacturer. So I think that those would be cool. And, Peter's pretty cool at looking at stuff like that. Whether there's any economics behind it is another thing. But if that was something they could do as a service, then maybe that would be nice. But the bottom line is, if you say, is there a drawback of the Sidewinder? Yeah, well, one of them is it's really difficult to reach your butt D-ring. And so you have to come up with other mounting options. I've been using the drop attachments for clipping things off, and that works well. You can reach those no problem. That's certainly one of the issues. And yes, so the mod that was done was that. The other thing that Edd did that I don't know that I'm quite as enamored with is he turned it into an H-style harness. So they changed the shoulder straps and they go straight down. I've been making it work and I've been resistant to changing it just yet because I want to dive it a little more and see if I really do like it or not. But it does mean that it can be a little bit challenging to move sliding D-rings again, in Florida, they don't tend to do that very much because they're diving steels in freshwater all of the time. So their buoyancy doesn't change too much. They tend to be quite negative in freshwater. But steels and salt are going to get a little more positive. And certainly the steels that I dive here do get a little positive. I do use my sliding D-rings, so I do need them to be able to move. So I've got to make an assessment whether the H is going to work or not, whether I need to go back to the traditional style of that. And
what's the reason for the H?
The reason for it is Edd finds it more comfortable, I think, and also it is quite easy to don. So it makes it much easier to get into the unit than with the more tighter shoulder straps that go to the back. So I think that's the two reasons: more comfortable and easy donning, and the fact that they don't need to use sliding D-rings because they've got less cylinder buoyancy issues. Some other mods that Edd put on there is he's put very small rings on there, which for the Sidewinder attachments as well. The top bungee from the cans, he's got a little attachment that you clip on there as well, which is in the customization. And 2 chest D-rings, one of which he clips the cylinders to as well, a little bit like we use safety clips. They're cool little mods, and as I said, I've taken it, I've just said, hey Edd, modify it for me, and I wanted to see what they came up with. When I got there, I thought, oh no, I should have really been more specific than that. But now that I've dived it a fair bit and I've got it working, as I said, I'm going to stick with it for a few more dives before I ponder changing it. And I may or may not change back to the normal shoulders and make a couple of other adjustments. But that would be purely because I need to use sliding D-rings in saltwater.
I was amazed on my side by the little modifications required when I'm switching back to open circuit compared to installing the unit on the side mount system. It requires very little changes. There are some things that can be fine-tuned always, of course, but it's really adaptable to any kind of unit.
Yeah.
When Jacek came over, he had never seen a Razor before, so it was quite a discovery and surprise for him, but it didn't take us much time to find some ways around to have the unit fitting properly. Coming back to a more broad side mount topic, you've been diving side mount quite a while now, and you know the industry and market pretty well. Even more with all these podcasts running, what are you seeing as any problem associated with the position side mount diving as in the industry?
Yeah, I started in 2013, which is not that long ago, 6 coming up 7 years. And in the beginning, certainly I was living on the west coast of California, and side mount diving was virtually unknown on the west coast. Certainly east coast and Florida was quite well known, obviously Mexico and parts of Europe, but nobody there dived side mount. So I was the only side mount diver in the part of California that I was diving. And then in New Zealand, it was very, very uncommon as well. There'd been one other guy who was a cave explorer, Tom Crisp, who had done some side mount diving and was diving side mount regularly in caves, but it was only him and a couple of his students. So it was very uncommon back then. And as I tend to travel, and also I'm a little bit pig-headed sometimes, once I decided I was a side mount diver, that was it. I insisted on diving side mount, and I don't care if you're an operator and you don't like it, that's not my problem, it's your problem. And so I'm going to dive side mount. And so I found I had a few interesting conversations. Also, some of that was along my journey as well. So I certainly wasn't as slick back then as I guess I've become now. So there were times when I struggled into the water and struggled out of the water and didn't have things as good as they could be. And I remember preparing actually to come to Gozo. I think I was trying to do a decompression ascent in Monterey, and this poor dude that was helping me, and it was horrible. So it actually reminds me how far I've come since, going to Gozo in particular as well. But the big changes that I've seen is there's a greater acceptance of side mount in any environment now than there used to be. There used to be, that's good for caves and that's all. And I think now that we're seeing more side mount divers diving open water and enjoying the benefits of that in terms of managing your cylinders individually and having flexibility in terms of getting on and off boats and that sort of thing, that's been a big change. I think there's still some resistance, but we're getting better at that. The other big change I've seen is, I think, while the standard across the world is still not great, there's still a lot of really bad side mount diving out there and a lot of poor instruction. The standard is improving. And, it's a credit to the people who are out there doing it, the likes of yourself. I mean, I'm such a fan of Steve Martin and the whole Side Mount Essentials group that you're part of with Vas and Steve and Matteo. I think it's just awesome because the level that you guys are teaching at is the level that everyone should aspire to, I think. Now, you guys teach a particular way. It's for Mexico-based side mount
methodology, if you like, Bogarthian, if you want to call it that as well. But the bottom line is that once you've chosen a methodology, you want to find someone who can teach you that well and has a consistent approach to it and a methodology that means that everything is taken care of. Because side mount, I remember talking to Misha about this way back. Little small things make big differences. 1 centimeter here and there can make a difference to the way your unit's going to dive. So having someone who actually knows and understands the implications of shortening a bungee 1 centimeter, of moving a clip 1 centimeter, of re-sighting something, of doing it in a particular way, that makes a big difference. So I think the fact that there's more of this out there now, and I'd like to think that Speaking Sidemount's been part of that as well, exposing the world to some of the better instructors out there in particular, I think is helping. And so we're seeing better role models. Certainly if you go to Mexico, I'm sure you see great side mount divers in the water every day there, right? There's a lot of good divers around now. So you see less of it. Other parts of the world aren't as strong. So I think that's the challenge in front of us, is how do we continue to lift the standard of side mount diving? And I think we do that through education, through making people aware of what is good and why it's worthwhile aspiring to that.
Do you believe that online training materials or written training materials can be standalone support for people to learn side mount on their own?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because obviously Steve's materials with the Side Mount Essentials online program, if you'd asked me before I'd seen that, I would say categorically no. You cannot learn from video. You must go to an instructor. It's the only way that you can learn, and without an instructor, you won't say you're going to die, but it's kind of pretty black and white, right? You're not going to get a good result. Steve's videos changed that, and they really were a paradigm shifter, because for the first time, there was a level of detail inside video that just was not normal. There were hours and hours and hours of video content, and all of those little details were taken care of. So I think that was the first time you would say, well, actually, if I'm a reasonably competent diver and I got hold of this video and I did everything that it showed me to do and I put it in the water, I could probably get a fairly good result and then iterate around for a while and video myself, and then maybe I'd get a good result. I still think you should throw an instructor in there somewhere. I still think to get the best result, if you combine those two methodologies together, if you combine great video content and training with a good instructor, you're going to get the best outcome in the shortest period of time. But there's no doubt that that's changed the paradigm. And I know Steve and the team that you're associated with is doing some work on revamping that material. So, yeah, I'm a big fan. Is it the be-all and end-all? So is it the only way that you can learn? Absolutely not. You can go to a great instructor and come out with a really good result. But I think 4 days, 5 days of training, side mount essentials, side mount fundamentals, whatever you want to call it, you're going to move yourself a certain distance. And then after that, you need to keep working and you need to keep refining and keep practicing to build that skill set. And those videos can be really helpful in doing that. So I certainly am a big fan of the video program that Steve has, and have used it myself to support my diving and to help me with little things along the way. So I don't see that there's necessarily a black and white. You can learn from video. Should you? I think you probably should go to an instructor, but can you? Yeah, I think you can. For the first time, that's making that possible.
Right. When you consider modern side mounts compared to the origin of side mount, which is cave diving, it can be thought as relatively new compared to BCD style, for instance. Do you think there is a sufficient level of knowledge and skill on the teaching side that is not passing on the best training or message about what side mount is and what it should look or be like?
Yeah, it's sort of a little bit what we talked about before, which is, the level of instruction. And I think the only thing I need to add on the instructor thing is, before you go and do a course with anybody, research your area and find the best person you can find to train with. Not everyone can cross the planet and go and train with Edd Sorenson, or certainly from my part of the world, go to Gozo and train with you, or go to Mexico and train with Patrick. Not everyone has that ability. And, I would say if you do have that ability, it's an experience that just builds your diving so much. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how much I learned while I was in Gozo. Part of that was the people I was hanging with, and part of that was me, and that I tend to be very observant. I told you this before, but I used to watch you like a hawk. And and every movement, how does Audrey do this? How does she clip her cylinders? How does she move in the water? How does she fin? Just everything.
And that's the level of, I think, detail you need to at least look for when you want to be a good side mount diver. There are great role models and you need to find them and dive with them. So back to the topic, when you're looking for an instructor, it's easy to fall into the trap of I've been diving with my local dive shop and they run a side mount course and I can do side mount with them. Well, maybe you can, but most times you're going to find they're not side mount specialists, that they're actually really back mount divers who did a side mount specialty instructor course way back sometime and aren't necessarily the best people to learn this particular configuration from. And it is quite different. So what I would say is find the best instructor you can find. And so if it's in your local area, do some research, look on YouTube, see if there's good video content of them, see what their photographs look like, look at their students. That's always a good sign. And with some element of pride, one of my last students came to me and said to me, he said, I chose to come and train with you because I saw one of my friends diving and they were diving side mount and they were vastly better than the last time I had seen them. And he went up to this person and said, what the hell happened to you? And he said, I went and trained with Steve. I thought, wow, that's so cool, because that's the impact that you want to have, right, as an instructor. Is you want someone to go from here to there and improve the standard of instruction that you're delivering as demonstrated by your students. And, not everyone can come out and be great straight away, but that's certainly a measure. Back to the point, when you're finding an instructor, make sure you find a good one. Someone who dives side mount regularly, if not exclusively.
This quiz for details and improvement seems to be really side mount specific. I experienced this myself during workshops for people who train already and want to refine some details and get better. There's actually a big share of people who trained already in the past who might be really good, or some former students I had who want to keep on working and doing skills.
Yes.
And coming back from other configuration myself, I never experienced the same thing for single tank diver or back mount divers. But side mount divers, most of them seems to be demanding a lot of this in general.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of call for that. I remember talking to Matteo about that too, about running workshops for other people who had done side mount training but hadn't really come out of it at the level that they wanted to be. And look, I think that sort of training, whether it's a workshop or whether they come and redo a course, it just accelerates their time to competency. I mean, you can figure it out yourself. And I pretty much had to. I mean, I got great training from Jason Renaud way back in Mexico, but it was at the very beginnings of the side mount essentials type training. And it was also in fresh water in caves in Mexico with aluminium cylinders. I then went to cold water dry suit with steel cylinders, and it's different, and I struggled. And I had nobody to help me on the West Coast, nor did I have anybody to help me in New Zealand. So I had to figure it out for myself. So it took some years. To be brutally honest, when I turned up in Gozo, I was okay, but I took a dramatic jump forward in a very short period of time, just hanging out with the instructors there. And I think going to those sort of workshops, I think, is invaluable. And so the money that you invest there is really just shortening your time to competence. Yeah, my next course is exactly that, with a couple of divers. They're instructors, they're already side mount certified, but they know that they're not the finished product. And so they're going to come and do a full course with me, and that's great. I commend them for that. I think that's going to speed up their time to becoming good side mount divers, and they'll be better for it. And if they want to be side mount instructors, it's also going to make them a better side mount instructor too. So I think that's fantastic.
Right. So when you're teaching, how do you approach your own courses? What is your focus, and how do you structure the learning process for your students?
Great question. When I start a course with a student, the first thing I need to know is, what do they want to do? Why are they going to two-cylinder diving? Why did they choose side mount over back mount? So I'm interested in the value that they see in it, and then where do they want to take it? So, it should be a different course if they want to dive open water than if they want to be a cave diver, for instance. I mean, there'll be the same elements, but you've got a different goal at the end of it. Right. So therefore you can adjust the course accordingly. So that's kind of the first thing, is why side mount, and then what do you want to do with side mount? And so once I know that, then that sort of drives particularly the in-water requirements. But the first thing we really do is we go straight to the equipment. And so it kind of starts with having a good equipment platform. And we go through the setup. We do a cylinder workshop and we set the cylinders up. I teach them about the correct band heights, in particular, the correct clip lengths, and making sure that they have that dialed in. And also the positioning of those, and the reasons that you might rotate your clip around a cylinder, for instance, and how it's different with aluminium cylinders than steel cylinders. So we finish the cylinder workshop, we then go on to the regulators and show them how to set up their short hose, long hose, which is the way that I teach, and show them how to attach that to the cylinder properly. And so maybe it's the engineer in me as well, but I'm very particular about tidiness, hose stowing, that sort of thing. I don't like seeing hoses all over the place and stowed in a messy manner. I think it just shows a lack of attention to detail. So I show them how to do that properly, and we talk about the reasons for that, and also the different ways of stowing the long hose, etc., which is a bit of a challenge for most people. But at that point, the cylinders are set up and standing there, so then it's time to look at their harness. 99 times out of 100, I'm teaching on the XDEEP Stealth, and if there's a weakness in my teaching, it's that I'm not particularly experienced with other side mount harnesses. I have trained on a few others, but I don't have a great deal of experience with the Razor or with some of the others. And I'm the first to admit that I only get to teach a course once a month or twice a month sometimes. So I don't tend to teach outside of that. For me, that's okay. I don't think it's necessarily good though. So I think as a good side mount instructor, you should be able to teach on many different styles of harness. But as you and I know, there's some good ones and some not so good ones.
Right.
But travel to Australia, you see a lot of halcyon harnesses, which I hadn't been great fans of. But then, I see good divers making them work really, really well. And maybe the problems in my mind and not so much with the harness. You see the same in Florida with different harnesses there, which I haven't been a fan of. But then you see good divers making them work. But what I do is I make sure that their stealth is set up properly. And so we really spend a lot of time fitting it, making sure it sits in the right position on their back, making sure the nodes are in the right place, making sure that the waist strap in particular is in the right position. And so once that's done, and I'm a big fan of land drills. Once we've got everything set up, we'll take a little break, but then we're straight into cylinder donning. We sit down on a park bench and we don cylinders like you do on a boat, or as you would standing in the water, and we're donning and we're doffing and we're donning and we're doffing and we're donning and we're doffing to make sure that we dial that in and they become competent and able to put their cylinders on properly, so that if they're on a boat, they can go straight over the side, or if they have to walk a little ways with them, they can do that. I'm not a big fan of walking with cylinders attached to you, but sometimes you have to. So I do make sure that they're aware of that. I also land drill even the simple things like regulator switching, gas management, because it's really hard to teach it in the water. I find communication goes down dramatically with hand signals and so on. And it's one thing to show them in the water, but it's another thing to be able to show them and talk it through first. So we don't do anything in the water that I haven't land drilled. We'll land drill every single aspect, from checking your gas pressure. How do you do that? What's the best way to move your hands to do that?
Right.
Yeah, how do you adjust the cylinder so that you can reach it easily with your other hand? I'm a big fan of left hand, right hand as well. If you're working with your long hose side, then your left hand helps, your right hand does, and the other hand opposite. So in that way, they don't cross their hands over and find they're doing things in suboptimal ways. So it's really quite detail oriented. And then once we're in the water, especially when we're first getting in the water, I like to get their weighting check done and their trim check done. And then once we're past that, I just give them some time to swim around on the first day. It's really just get used to this.
Get the feeling.
Yeah, get the feeling. Propulsion. Sometimes their frog kick isn't very good, so it's a chance to look at that a bit and see where they're at with that. Funnily enough, Edd did the same thing with me on the Sidewinder. There was a lot of swimming around on the first day, just getting used to what this is and how it feels. And then from there, we continue on. Day 2 is sort of looking at the side mount skills, which is a lot about gas management, regulator switching, and that sort of thing. And then we get on to what I call the side mount safety or emergency drills, where we go through the 10 drills that they need to be able to do up to gas sharing and so on. And yeah, it's a bit of detail, but it's methodical and process driven and done in such a way that each day they build their skills so that their platform, as I describe it, of being in trim, stable, buoyancy control, that's all dialed in. So hopefully at the end of the course, they find the more complicated skills easier because they've become stable.
Are you constrained in any way in the time you're dedicating to training for your students?
Yeah, we are because of this whole New Zealand diving thing, it tends to be 4 days. And if they don't make it in 4 days, we have to book another time. That is challenging. So it's not like coming to Gozo and staying for 2 weeks and we've got a 4-day course and you find, it really would be better for you if it was 5 or 6 days. So the extra time facet is a bit of a challenge. I have had some students that I've been working with in an ongoing way. It's just some people it takes a bit more time, and with them I've booked sporadic trips that we work with each other on. We kind of workshop things. What tends to happen here is once they've done the course, they go out sidemount diving and they're learning themselves. But it's oftentimes where I say, gee, I wish I had another day or another 2 days, but it's not always very easy. They have to go back to work.
You're working more closely with some major equipment manufacturer now. How are you seeing their development of new equipment that is benefiting diving in general and specifically for sidemount?
Yeah, and while I'm sponsored by XDEEP, I wouldn't describe it as working closely with them. I'd love to, but they've got some great people. Patrick Widman is the main design guy for XDEEP, and then I know Thomas Michura has a really close association with them through being in Poland, and so there's 2 exceptional sidemount divers that are contributing to their development. So I don't work that closely with them, but they very kindly sponsor my podcast, which I'm incredibly appreciative of, because this thing takes a truckload of time. And without that, it would be really challenging, to be honest, to be able to devote the time to it that I do. So I really appreciate that. And so through that, talk to them a bit about what they're doing. I see some of the products that they have coming. So for instance, the new clips that they released, I got some of those reasonably early and was able to look at them. And I loved that innovation that they put into those. God, the clip is so simple. And yet just putting a little flat on it made it so much easier to work a clip with gloves on. So I thought they were terrific. I know they have a new mask coming out, which looks exciting. They have new regulators coming out, which also look incredibly exciting. So there's some innovations that I'm no more in the light than you are. So I wish I was. But I'm excited about both of those and look forward to doing my own testing and trying them. And certainly I'll provide some feedback and do that through Speaking Sidemount as well. In terms of the Stealth, the most recent changes to put a redundant bladder inside the Stealth tech, which I wouldn't really call innovative because the Razors had that for a while. The method of doing it is different, which is good. But I think it's closed the door on what might be a perceived weakness with the Stealth over the Razor or some other units that do have redundant bladders, so that's a good thing. I don't tend to use the redundant myself because I'm diving dry suit, so my redundancy is dry suit, so I'm not very concerned about it. I'm certainly more concerned wetsuit diving, and in truck I talked a little bit about using the classic bladder with the tech or the rec, which gave me some redundancy, which I liked, but that's kind of a bit of a Frankenstein child of using 2 BCDs together, which we developed and I've copied, but I'm not aware of what they've got coming next. I don't know if there's a Stealth 3 coming or anything like that. I should ask. But it's a great piece of equipment. I love it. I love them. I like the attention to detail they have. And it's a nice unit to dive. And as I said, XDEEP have been incredibly good to me. So there's some respect there. But I was diving XDEEP for 6 years before I even had spoken to Peter personally. So which came first in this one was I love the unit. Then they became a sponsor. It's cool, but I'm not that tightly ingrained with them that I'm seeing things that the general public aren't seeing, put it that way. So I'm waiting with bated breath for some things just the same as everyone else is.
So beyond the equipment part, what do you see as the next steps in the growth of sidemount diving?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think we talked about it before. The biggest growth, I think, still is in training. And I think in understanding that sidemount can be taken outside of its natural habitat of the cave. And I think it is unique about sidemount. I sort of talked about this a bit, and sometimes I'm probably considered to be a bit of a zealot, which is fine. I don't mind that. But, you're a backmount diver. You can dive backmount anywhere. You can dive at open water. You can dive it in caves and so on to a point. And then you come to a point in a cave and you can't do it anymore. Or you come to a point in the wreck and you can't go there anymore. Whereas with sidemount, I can dive at open water. I can dive it in wrecks, in caves, and I can go pretty much anywhere my body shape can go. And I don't have to change anything for any of those dives. Does sidemount have limitations? Of course it does. There's going to be a limit on boats where you're in particularly rough water and you're diving multi-cylinder. It's going to be challenging. Or with currents and multi-cylinder. But 2-cylinder sidemount diving versus backmount diving, I can go anywhere on a boat that a backmount diver can go. I can dive my cylinders on the boat. I can go straight in the water. I can do a negative descent. In fact, I've done that several times in Florida on my advanced wreck training. No problem. 3 cylinders, okay, yeah, it's going to get hard. 4 cylinders is going to get really hard. But it's pretty tough for the backmount guys then too, isn't it? My perspective is pretty well known now, but I think you can take sidemount anywhere. And I think that's what I'd like to see more acknowledgement of, is that the value of sidemount and its flexibility in particular, its ability to go in virtually any environment and be the right tool of choice, as opposed to, I'm going to pick the best tool for this job. Well, Sidemount is the best tool for this job as far as I'm concerned. Now, people will disagree with that, and that's okay, but that's my perspective. And as I said, until I hit the hard stops, which is rough water, strong currents, and 4 cylinders, I'm not very worried about it. In terms of improvements, I think better trained side mount divers and people understanding the configuration better, I think is the thing I would love to see. It still grates me a bit when I see people not diving it well, particularly when they're not diving it well and they take it into an overhead or they take it into a decompression type area. That still concerns me. We're very lucky diving is relatively safe. We don't have that many fatalities, but I would rather see people learning properly and developing the right skill sets before they take it into overheads or decompression diving.
Well, thanks to the development of it, you see more people understanding that actually they are not diving it well, which was not the case in the past.
Yeah, I agree. And it's this kind of self-reflection, and video helps that a lot, doesn't it? You can think you're pretty good until somebody shows you a video and you go, oh my God. And I don't know if you do, you probably don't ever go through that, but from time to time, someone will take a photograph and I think, oh, gee, that was the wrong moment. I wish they hadn't taken that one. And so what it shows is that there's always room for improvement. And I think being a reflective diver or self-reflective or self-aware diver is a cool thing, knowing your limitations and knowing that there's always room for improvement. And if you're diving side mount and you realize that you're not doing it well, then I think you should improve that. And there's many ways that you can now do that.
Well, Steve, thanks for your time. Thanks for your honesty. Thanks for all the time you're dedicating to everyone in the end, because everybody's learning, and it's always lovely to listen to your podcast and discover so many people and professional profiles through your podcast. So thanks a lot for all of this. And time for you to enjoy a good coffee in your beach box now.
Actually, I'm supposed to go to the gym this morning, so I might go coffee gym or gym coffee, something like that. But look, Audrey, it's been amazing. And thank you so much for being my guest interviewer. It's been a lot of fun.
Wow, first time ever.
Actually, I may have competition here.
Oh, well, once is enough for me.
Terrific job. Thank you. And great to catch up with you again. Yeah, we're very good friends and we don't get to dive with each other at all now. So we have to fix that sometime soon. Huh?
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Hey, thanks very much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it wasn't too self-indulgent having me as the guest, with Audrey Cudel, I think, doing a great job interviewing me. If you'd like to know more about side mount fundamentals, don't forget my Side Mount Fundamentals ebook is available through the Sidemount Pro store, www.sidemountpro.store, and we are looking forward to an amazing 2020. I have so many things planned that I can't wait to share with you, so look out for all of that in the new year. I just want to wish you all a great holiday season. I hope your new year is fantastic, and let's look forward to a wonderful 2020 with a heap of side mount diving. Catch you soon in the next episode.
You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.